Hello and welcome to the most important and informative Godot 4 tutorial series you'll ever watch, because we're going to be creating this game you see on screen from start to finish, step by step. And I'm going to be explaining how everything works and why everything works. We will be starting from creating our player, to movement, to AI enemy, to our own combat system, to changing scenes, to having a weather cycle, to having smooth camera movement, using tile sets, etc. We'll be going over everything you need to know about Godot 4 and how to create your own game. As I said, this exact game is the result of this tutorial series, so if you want to create an RPG, this is the perfect series for you. But let's get started with episode 1. And before we get started, I just want to ask if you could go down there, hit that subscribe button, drop a like on this video to help YouTube push this series to more inspiring game developers so they can learn to make their own Godot games as well. But without further ado, let's hop in and get started with episode 1 of this series. So in this episode, we're going to basically keep it simple, create player movement, and create like a grid type of player movement, so it goes up, down, left, or right. And we're gonna have like a semi-advanced animation system thing, so we'll have like a bunch of different animations playing based on like what state the player is in, right? Just like, well, let's just create it, right? So I left a link in the description to this art folder right here, and you can see we have a couple characters, which is our player and a slime. We have some objects, and we have our grass and plains tile set. So you can download that on itch.io. I'll have a link to it in the description. I'll make sure that I give credit to the owner and everything, because it is not my art, but I'll make sure credit is given. And yeah, go download this in the itch.io if you want to copy everything exactly. But if you already have like your own art, then you should be fine. So I also want to go down here just so we can keep our game organized, and we're going to create 2 new folders. We're going to create a folder for our scripts, and we're also going to create a new folder for our scenes, right? And then I'm also going to drag this icon, which comes in the game, into our art folder just so it can be in there, so everything looks organized. And now we have scenes and a script folder. So we're going to start off by making a brand new scene, which is going to be a 2D scene, and we'll just name this our world. And if we Control S, we'll save it, and we'll make sure we save it into our scenes folder. And now we have something in our scenes folder, which is our world. But we're not really going to do anything to the world, to be honest, in this episode. So we're going to go and create a brand new scene, and we're going to make a other node, and we're going to use a character body 2D. So in the old Godot, this used to be called a kinematic body 2D, but now it's called a character body 2D. It's basically the exact same thing. And we'll just rename this to our player. And yeah, so we need, obviously for our player, we're going to need a collision shape 2D. We're also going to need a animated sprite 2D, and for our animated sprite 2D, we're going to create our animations, and that's what we're going to do right now, right? So we can go up here to our animations, we can create new sprite frame, we click on this new sprite frame, and it will bring up this animation player. So this is our sprite frame, our animation, and this is where we can create our animations, right? So we'll just name our first animation idle, and we can go up here to this grid, go to art, go to characters, go to player.png, and it's going to bring out this, right? So this tile set is actually it's 6 horizontal, right? Because it's 1 2 3 4 5 6 that way, and then it's like 10 vertical. And as you can see, it splits everything up perfect. And these top ones are the idle. Make sure you click them all in order like this. So this is our idle animation, right? So if we add 6 frames and we zoom in on our player, you can see it's blurry, but we'll fix that here in just a second. But if you can see, if we click play, you can see we have a little bit of a idle, right? It's an idle animation. So it is a little bit blurry. So to fix this is new in the new Godot. So in the old Godot, you used to go down here to art, characters, and then player PNG, and you go to import, and then you do it in here. It is no longer the case. You have to go up to project settings, and then you got to go down here to the render tab, and then texture areas, which is, or it's like under the rendering tab, right? So under the rendering, then textures, and then you can see down here that we have like linear, and we have disabled and everything. This doesn't matter, but the default texture filter, instead of it being linear, you need it to be nearest. So once it's at nearest and we close it, you can see everything looks clear, and we have a clear animation, right? And then we have a ton of different animations. So we have like a front idle animation, and if we go and check in our thing, it's gonna make us grid it again, but you can see that our front idle animation would be what looks to be the one that we just did. Yeah, we just did that. So this is actually our side idle. So this one right here is actually our side idle animation. This one right here is actually our front idle animation. But then we can create a new animation, and this is going to be our back idle animation, and our back idle animation is obviously going to be the very next row. As you can see, our character's facing back, and this is our animation. And then we can create a new animation, and this is going to be our walk animations, right? So we have our front walk, and then we can go to our player.png and split it up right here. This is our front walk because we're walking like downwards. And then we have our side walk, which is going to be right below those, right? So it's going to be, these are side walking. So we're walking to the side. And the reason it's called sidewalk is because you don't need an animation for right and left, because we'll just flip the character horizontally, right? But that's our sidewalk. And then we also need our back walk. And our back walk is going to be the very next one right here, just like so. And then we're going to have all of the different attacks, right? So we'll have a new animation, and we'll name this our front attack. And then we will split up this again, and this is our front attack. And then another animation, which is going to be our side attack. And our side attack is going to be the very next one. And I know this is super, super repetitive, but we're about to get into the code, and we're actually going to be coding stuff here in just a second. And then we have our back attack. Back attack. And then we go here, we split it up. And this is our back attack here. And then we actually have a death animation, right? So we'll have a death animation. And we can see that the death animation is the very final one, like so. And if we actually play the death animation, as you can see, it looks like our player does die. Our back attack, our front idle, our back idle, our back walk, our death, our front attack, our front idle, our front walk, our side attack, front side idle, and then side walk. So that all looks good. And now we have animations for our player. Okay, so now that we have all of the animations for our player, we can exit out of our animated sprite. Let's move this down right here. And we need to create a player script. So we actually have a script for our player. And we'll just click this little button up here, which is going to let us create a new script, player.gd, save. And as you can see down here in our file system, our player.gd came into a normal, or it just came into the file system, and it's not in its script folder. So we can just move this into the script folder, and everything is like looking organized. And we also need to save the player scene. So we'll save the player scene into the scenes folder, and then that is all good. So we're just going to remove all this in our character body 2D, which is our player script. And we're going to kind of make some variables for ourselves, which is going to be like speed. And we'll set that to like 100 to start. We can play around with it. We can move the speed around here at the end of this video, so we can like see what works best. But we also need a so I was about to make a motion vector, but we no longer need motion vectors in Godot, because in the old Godot you needed motion vector, right? You needed to do var motion equals a vector 2.0, right? And then you'd call motion everywhere. But now in Godot 4 it's velocity, and you don't even have to create a variable. So I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a second. So let's start a physics process function. We'll pass for now, and then let's create a new function which is going to like control all the player movement, you know, in our player. So player movement, and we'll also pass through delta here. And in here, this is where all of our, you know, player stuff is going to be happening, right? So we're going to get our input for if we go right, left, up, down. So we'll say if input dot is action pressed, not just pressed, but is action pressed, and then is action UI right. So if we click the right button, then we're going to want our velocity. If I can type, we want our velocity.x to equal our speed, and we want our velocity y to equal to 0, right? Because this is like a grid-based movement, so we can only move up, and then we can only move left, and we can only move right, and we can only move down. We can't move in 2 directions at the exact same time. But if you do want smooth movement, I just created a video not that long ago on that. I'll link it in the descriptions, and it's like super smooth for, you know, super smooth movement. But this is like a more of a grid-based movement because it looks better for an RPG. So we can just do is input dot is, you know, action press, and actually I'm going to go right here and we can just copy this, and then we can do else if, and then paste that, and then instead of it being the right, we need it to be the left. And then velocity.x equals speed. It needs to equal negative speed, so it can go in the opposite direction. And then y still does need to equal to 0. But if we copy this and we paste it again, then we have UI down instead of left. And then velocity.y, right? Velocity.y needs to equal to positive speed, and velocity.x needs to equal to 0. So we're only moving down, we can't move any other direction when we move down. And then velocity.x is equal to 0 when we're going up, right? And then the key is UI up. So change the speed here to negative speed, so we go up. And then if nothing is being pressed, right? If no input's being pressed, then we want velocity.x to equal 0, and we want velocity.y to also equal 0, because that means we are stopped and we're at a standstill. But at the very bottom of the function, we need to do we need to do move and slide, and then just call that function. It's a built-in Godot function. And then this function up here, we need to call into our physics process, right? The function that we just created. So we'll do player movement, and then we'll pass through delta. We're not actually using delta yet, but we will use delta here in a little bit. So now that we have this, we can play the player scene, and we can see that we do have movement. We can move down, left, up, right, and we can't move in 2 directions at the exact same time, which is good, but you can see it is very, very small. So to fix this, temporary fix, we're gonna, you know, change this later in a different episode when we add our cameras and stuff. But we can go to our project settings, and then we can go down here to window right here, and then we can just scale, and we can set scale to like we'll go with like 4. And then if we play, you can see that it's a lot bigger, and we can see the player a lot better. But obviously it's not going to be scale 4, because we're going to fix that when we add cameras and stuff to the game. And you can see player movement looks good, but we have no animations. So that's what we need to do, right? We need to fix the animations, and to do that, we'll go back to our player script, and we need to make a brand new variable, which this variable is going to be called our current direction. So we'll just do current dar equals none, right? Because we're going to start off going no direction. And then we need to go to our button right here, right? So we have UI right. So when we go right, we need to set our current direction equals to right. So we know that we're going right. And then we need to play our animation, right? So play animation 1. And this play animation right here is going to be our own function, right? But if we're going right, we'll set our animation to 1, because that means it's like play, or that means we need to be like playing a walk animation, right? So if it's 1, if we're passing 1 through our function, that means we need to play walk. But okay, I'll show you guys this here in just a second. But we need to start off by changing, you know, all the current directions. So current direction equals to left, and then down here current direction equals to down, and then right here current direction equals to up. And then we need to go create a brand new function, and we'll name this function our play animation, and then we'll just do like, we'll pass through a variable, and our variable that we pass through, the variable that we pass through will be called like movement, right? Or we can call it direction, or anything. No, we'll name it movement because this means if we're walking or if we're idle, right? So we'll make two local variables, which are going to only work inside this function for our direction variable, which is going to just be equal to the current direction. And then we're also going to have a variable for our animation player, which is just going to get for our animated sprite, which is just going to get our animated sprite 2D. And then let's create an if function, right? So this is going to show like how we play our animations, right? Because we don't want to be playing, you know, an idle animation and a walk animation at the same time. We want to be playing them when they need to be played. So we'll do like if direction is equal to right, right? So if the direction is equal to right, then we'll do our animation, which is basically our animation player dot flip h equals false, because that means we don't need to flip it because we need to be facing, you know, we need to be facing this way, right? We need to be facing moving this way, which is how our sprite is set up. And then we can do if our movement, which is what we pass through the function, the number that we pass through the function, if our movement is equal to 1, then we can do animation dot play, and then we can play our side walk animation, right? And then we do our else if movement is equal to 0, which means we're not moving, then animation.play, and animation.play will play our side idle, right? So hopefully this makes a little bit of sense. So let me make the function up here and we'll pass through. So if we're going right, then we want to call our animation, right? And we'll call the animation, which is going to be play animation, but then we need to pass through a function, right? Or we need to pass through some number. So we'll pass through 1 because that means we're moving, right? We're moving in some direction, right? So then we'll go down here and we'll do play animation, and it's kind of going to be the exact same thing. So yeah, it's going to be the exact same thing down here and down here. We just need to make sure we call that function if we're moving any way. And then down here is actually going to be a 0 because this means we're not moving, right? Because if it's else, that means we're not moving, velocity 0, and everything is 0. But as you can see, if our direction is equal to right, then it's going to make sure our animation is not flipped, because if we're going left, then this needs to be true, right? Because we need to have our animation player flipped, right? So then it's going to say if movement is equal to 1, which means we're in a movement function, which means we're in one of these, but we obviously have to be in this one, right? Because our direction is equal to right, and if our direction is equal to right, that's how it gets in here. But if our direction is equal to right and we're not moving, then we need to be playing the idle animation. That's when we'll play side idle, right? So that we can kind of just completely copy this and then paste it, and then instead of it being right here, we need this to be our left, and animation flip needs to be equal to true, and then these can kind of stay the exact same, and then we can copy it 2 more times, and for these 2 more times we can name this one our down, and then we can name this our front walk and our front idle, and then instead of it being left, this needs to be up, and this can be our back walk and our back idle, right? So now if we play, we should hopefully have animation if everything works as planned, which normally things don't work as planned, but as you can see, walking, 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 idle side, idle side, idle up, idle down. It all works, right? But if you notice at the very beginning when we play, it has our player is frozen, and that's because we did not add, you know, we don't have any ready function. So as soon as the game starts, we don't have any function to tell us to, you know, get a animation going, right? So we'll do ready equals, and then we'll just call something simple, right? So we'll just call animated sprite dot play. We'll do front idle, right? So front idle, And that problem should now be fixed. As you can see, if we play it and we run around, everything looks good. And I think if we play, we should be moving. Yeah, so we already have our idle and everything works. So that is how you create a simple player. We haven't done anything with the attack animations yet, but that's going to be very soon when we create a combat system, which is going to be pretty, complicated, pretty advanced, but it's also going to be very, very cool. So I hope this was, an informative video, and I hope this series is going to be a very, very helpful series, and it should be. I know it will if you follow along, and you will for sure learn a lot. But until next time, hit that subscribe button, drop a like on this video so others can learn to make their own Godot games as well. But stay safe and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.